When I stepped into the middle of my own birthday party, the chatter and the clinking glasses went silent like someone had just pulled all the air out of the room. Every eye turned to me, a 71-year-old woman with a black eye that no makeup could hide. And then, in the hush of the crowd, my son spoke up, clear and proud like he'd just declared a victory. "My wife simply taught my mother how to respect other people." A thin laugh followed. My daughter-in-law stood beside him, her eyes cold as steel. I didn't cry. I just pressed a cold compress to my eye and looked straight at the ceiling camera I'd quietly installed last week. I smiled, because I knew tonight every one of their lies was being recorded second by second. And when that door opens, the last person they expect will walk in with an envelope that will make this room fall silent a second time. If you're still listening, tell me where you're watching from. Every comment you leave is another mark in this journey. And if this story has touched you, don't forget to hit like so it can reach even further. My name is Janice Middleton, 71, widowed for 3 years. I've lived in this house for more than half a century, where Theodore, my husband, and I raised our only son, Caleb. I'm not as wealthy as people think, but I have what Theo and I worked our whole lives to keep: a home, a decent past, and a small measure of self-respect left. I used to think old age would be peaceful tea in the morning, watering flowers in the afternoon, looking through old photos at night. Turns out, what I had to learn at 71 was how to protect myself from the very person I gave birth to. Tonight, in this very house, I'm no longer the gentle mother or the frail widow. I'm the only one who still remembers that justice sometimes arrives late, but it arrives. The living room of Middleton House glowed with warm golden light. A jazz track hung half-finished in the air. This room used to be where my late husband, Theodore Middleton, and I hosted family nights with apple pie and lavender on the table. Now, in this same room, all I could hear was my own slow heartbeat and the whispering, guests trying to make sense of what had just happened. The emerald dress I chose for the evening suddenly felt somber under the lights. I saw a few of my husband's old friends glance away. A few neighbors looked down, unsure. A younger guest let out a quiet sigh. I knew what they were thinking. What's wrong with her? The question sat on their lips, though no one dared speak it. Riley took a step forward and grabbed Caleb's hand like she was staking a claim. Her voice was smooth, scripted. "I just want your mother to understand. She can't treat this house like it's hers alone. Your son has a family now." I kept my eyes steady. I didn't answer. I looked up at the corner of the ceiling, where a coin-sized camera turned slightly. Its tiny LED blinked like the eye of a loyal friend, waiting for my signal. No one knew that just 20 minutes earlier, I'd been upstairs with a compact powder in hand, about to touch up my makeup. Riley had walked in without knocking and calmly rifled through my jewelry box. When I said, "Don't touch my things," she smirked and shoved my shoulder as I stepped in. The fall slammed my head against the dresser edge, a stabbing pain tearing across my forehead. When I looked up, she was just standing there, coolly adjusting the silver bracelet on her wrist like nothing had happened. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, one slip can mean a broken bone." I said nothing. I wiped the blood from a small cut, looked in the mirror, my face swollen and crooked, but the light still in my eyes. I knew that if I stayed quiet tonight, tomorrow they'd call me confused and try to ship me off to a nursing home. I walked downstairs slowly. My heels hit each step in a steady rhythm, enough to make everyone turn. And then the shock, the one Riley never thought I'd have the nerve to deliver, was right there in front of them all. Me, with a black eye, chin up, wearing a cold smile. Caleb stood in the center of the room, gripping a whiskey glass. The son I once believed would protect his mother now looked at me like I was a troublesome stranger. "Mom, everyone's here. Please don't make a scene." His tone softened, but his eyes were full of annoyance. "I just want you to rest." Riley didn't mean it. "You slipped, that's all." I almost laughed. Slipped, the word floated out of his mouth like it hadn't just torn someone's heart. An older guest, a friend of my husband, set his glass down and said quietly, "Caleb, you should take your mother to get checked." Riley turned and gave a cool smile. "No need, she's fine. My mother-in-law is very strong." I watched a few people quietly leave, not wanting to be pulled into the embarrassment. What remained was thick, heavy silence. I pressed the cold compress to my eye, pulled my phone from my pocket, and swiped. The The security system's cloud backup kicked in. A tiny icon lit up. Uploading. I exhaled slowly. Anyone watching would assume I was calming myself, but inside, I'd started the countdown. In the corner, I saw my brother, Martin Cole, push through the crowd. Martin, once a Navy officer, 10 years older than me, still walked straight, with eyes sharp as steel. He took my hand, his voice low and steady. "You all right, Janice?" I nodded. "All right." He tilted his head, lowered his voice so only I could hear. "Don't give an inch. I already called Nora. She's on her way." I pressed my lips together. Just 2 days ago, I'd met with attorney Nora Park, an old friend of Theo's. She'd told me to back up every document in case of any forced transfer. I didn't think I'd need it this soon. In a room full of people, I stood still, looking at the two I used to call family. Riley clung to Caleb's arm, pretending to be caring, but her grip was so tight, her knuckles whitened. Caleb avoided my eyes, staring only at the bruise as if it proved the trouble of an old mother. A cold drop slid down my cheek, maybe from the compress, maybe a tear. I remembered what Theo used to say, "Janice, some battles don't need shouting. You just stand firm until the other side collapses." So I stood firm. A whisper rose behind me. Someone said, "Poor thing." Someone else said she should make room for her son. I heard it all, but I didn't react, because I knew in a few minutes, every one of those mouths would go quiet. Riley stepped closer, the fake smile back on her face. "Mom, let me take you upstairs. Everyone's having a good time, you shouldn't ruin the mood." I looked at her and said slowly, "No, Riley, this is my house. I'm staying right here." A soft murmur rippled through the crowd. Caleb flushed and looked away. Outside, through the big window, I saw headlights sweep across the entry. An engine shut off, heels clicked on the stone path. The doorbell rang a light sound, but sharp as a blade cutting the air. Riley squeezed Caleb's hand and whispered, "Who's showing up now?" I set my water glass down, adjusted the compress on my eye, and smiled for the first time all night. Small, tired, but calm. I knew exactly who was out there. And when the door opened with a red-sealed envelope in Nora Park's hand, my 71st birthday finally began. 3 years ago, I still said we. Now there's only I. That winter morning, sunlight slipped through the curtains, thin as paper. Theodore Middleton, the man who walked with me through nearly half a lifetime, lay beside me, peaceful like he was sleeping. I touched his shoulder and whispered, "Theo?" And the world, from that moment, went silent. No heartbeat, no breath, only the space between my fingers and his skin, cooling by the second. They say when a partner dies after so many years together, the house changes too. It keeps its shape, but the warmth is gone. Middleton House, the 2-story home we bought when Caleb was in 2nd grade, suddenly felt frighteningly large. I still remember every brick he laid by hand, every squeaky hinge he hadn't gotten around to fixing. Out back, the row of dark crimson roses Theo planted, the kind he said outlasts people, stood proud even in the frozen winter. The day he died, Caleb sat with me, holding my hand. He was just past 40, fatherless, and I had lost both my partner and my anchor. At the funeral, he promised, "I'll take care of you. You won't have to worry about anything." I believed him. I wanted to believe him, because in his eyes, I saw Theo's younger look, honest, steady, responsible. A few weeks later, attorney Nora Park came by with a thick folder tied with a gray ribbon. Her voice was gentle but firm. "Mr. Middleton prepared everything. Inside was the will. Theo left full ownership of Middleton House to me, no intermediaries, no sharing." At the end was a special clause, carefully typed, "In any circumstance where Mrs. Janice Middleton is forced, coerced, or manipulated to leave her home, the entire property shall not pass to any relatives but be transferred to the state's Elder Protection Fund." I read that part 3 times, my hands shaking so much I had to set my water down. Nora said Theo had come to see her just a month before he passed. He told her, "Janice is too kind. Someone could take advantage of her trust." I cried the whole afternoon, not because of money, but because, even to his last breath, he was thinking of me. That night, I sat on the back porch, moonlight on the roses. I heard his voice on the wind. "Don't let anyone use family ties to push you out of your own home." I didn't know why he said that. Back then, Caleb was still the devoted son calling me every morning, cooking weekend dinners, fixing leaky faucets without being asked. Maybe Theo sensed what I couldn't, that sometimes the danger doesn't come from a stranger knocking, but from the person who already has the key. In those first months after the funeral, Caleb moved back in. The house had a voice again. Every morning I made coffee. He read the paper and asked casually, "Did you sleep okay?" In the afternoons, he cut the grass, then ate dinner with me. We talked about Theo trips we took, the paint smell he liked, how he refused to buy pre-sliced bread. I thought the loss would soften. I kept my habit of journaling, the one Theo used to tease as the accountant's need for control. But my journals weren't just dates and thoughts. I saved receipts, invoices, copies of letters. I didn't know why I was so careful. Maybe as we get older, we need little slips of paper to prove we're still living, still in charge of something. Each morning after Caleb left for work, I cleaned, tended the plants, and dusted the wedding photo on the wall. Sometimes I touched the glass and told the man in the picture, "Don't worry, I'm okay." Truth was, I never truly felt okay. Without Theo, everything echoed. Wine down the hallway sounded like a sigh. The big kitchen held one plate, one teacup. I turned the TV on just to have a voice in the room. To keep from feeling lonely, I learned a few new things. I installed the smart lock Caleb gave me for Christmas, even though it took an entire afternoon to get it working. I downloaded the security camera app and synced it to my phone just to peek at the backyard when it rained. They were small things, but for me, they kept me busy, useful, above the silence. Back then, Caleb was sweet. He said, "Don't worry about the tech, Mom. I set it up. You just press one button." I nodded and smiled. He didn't know I had already taught myself to reset all the passwords and create a separate backup. It wasn't that I didn't trust my son. I just wanted one corner of safety that was mine, just in case. Every time I looked at Theo's paperwork, I remembered his words. He said, "A will isn't just paperwork. It's the invisible fence I'm building around you." Back then, it sounded like too much. Now I understand those invisible fences might be the only thing holding me steady against storms stirred up by my own family. That spring, Caleb got a promotion at the construction firm. I was happy. He bought new rose bushes for the yard, said they were for Dad. They bloomed late deep red and strangely fragrant. I thought things would get better, that we'd keep this house together, like a piece of Theo. But in that calm, I sometimes felt something off. Caleb was home less, took secretive calls, and said curtly, "Just work stuff." I didn't ask. He was entitled to privacy. I still trusted him. I trusted him until I saw how his eyes shifted whenever he mentioned Riley Sloan, the smart colleague he brought up more than anyone else. I didn't yet know Riley would become the storm that stripped my home bare. I only knew that behind Theo's warnings, fate seemed to be patiently waiting for its test. One windy night, I opened my journal and wrote the last line of the day. "Maybe you saw something coming. I'll try to be strong, Theo. I promise if anyone tries to take this house, they'll have to go through me first." Then I turned off the light and lay in the dark, listening to the smart lock click shut, a dry sound that, strangely, comforted me. I had no idea that 3 years later, those small things, journals, cameras, locks, would be the shield that saved me from the cruelest betrayal. That night before sleep, I stared at the ceiling where moonlight poured through the window. I thought of Theo, his summers mowing the yard, his hands stained with soil when he planted the first row of dark crimson roses. I smiled and whispered, "I'm still holding our fortress, Theo." I didn't know that promise would start a fight I never imagined I'd have to wage at 71. Caleb met Riley Sloan at a construction conference in Chicago. I remember he called that day, oddly excited, saying he'd met an amazing woman, gets the work, has taste, and is really sharp. I laughed and said, "You sound like the way your father first described me." He laughed, and I thought it was just a cute moment. I didn't know that woman would change everything in my life, from how people spoke to me to what home would mean. A few weeks later, Caleb brought Riley over. She walked into Middleton House like she already knew every brick. Cream blazer, brown hair tied back, heels tapping a confident rhythm across the hardwood. Riley hugged me, her expensive perfume flooding my nose so strong and sweet it was almost unpleasant. "Mrs. Middleton, I'm so glad to finally meet the woman Caleb always talks about," she said, smile bright as a camera flash. I answered politely, "Just call me Janice. Everyone does." "Janice," she repeated, dragging out the last sound like she was tasting my name. Her focused eyes, though smiling, didn't stay on my face. They skimmed the painting on the wall, the display cabinet, Theo's antique clock, everything, in under 10 seconds. I'm used to admiring looks, but Riley's wasn't admiration. It was appraisal. That night I made a careful dinner. Herb roasted chicken, Caleb's childhood favorite, arugula salad with fresh cheese, and warm bread. I wanted the first meeting to feel welcoming, the way I always greeted family. Riley praised the smell like an Italian restaurant, but ate only a few bites. She set down her knife and tilted her head with a smile. Tastes great. It's just, I'm doing low carb. Your kitchen seems a little coated in old oil smells, doesn't it? I paused. No one had ever said that in this kitchen, but I smiled and said, maybe the oven's old, I'll clean it again. She nodded, her eyes still on the oak tabletop where I could see quiet calculations. After dinner, Riley stood and strolled around the living room. This house has amazing potential, she said, like pitching a client. If we brighten the curtains, swap the rug, add a few modern planters, the value will jump. Who knows? If you ever need to sell later, you'll cash out big, I answered softly. I've never thought about selling. Riley turned back, still smiling. Oh, of course. But sometimes you can't predict the future, right? Caleb was clearing plates and chimed in. Riley's just helping you think ahead, Mom. She's a planner. She notices details people miss. I nodded, though something felt off, like a thread pulled tight somewhere in my chest. After that, Riley showed up more often. Weekends with wine or fresh flowers. On the surface, perfect. She spoke smoothly, knew when to compliment, when to laugh. But in her eyes, I always saw a quiet equation, like someone arranging a chessboard I hadn't realized I was standing on. Whenever she passed through the living room, she touched the chair arms, the table, the family frames. You and Mr. Middleton kept everything so well, she said. But this style, it's a bit too traditional. If you update, it'll feel brighter and more open. I just smiled, not wanting a debate. I've learned that an older person's silence is often mistaken for weakness, but sometimes it's a way to observe. Caleb seemed captivated by Riley. He often praised how independent, sharp, and considerate she was. Each time, I heard Theo's voice in memory. Be careful with people who make your son change how he talks about his own family. One June evening, Caleb brought Riley to announce their engagement. It all happened so fast I didn't have time to think. Are you sure? I asked. Sure, Mom. I've never met anyone who gets me like Riley. I looked at Riley. She smiled and took my son's hand. Your son is wonderful, Janice. I promise I'll always take care of him. I nodded. Something heavy sat in my chest, nameless. Their wedding was small, just a few dozen guests. Riley organized everything herself, saying I should just sit back and enjoy. I thought that meant respect until I looked closer. Everything at the wedding carried Riley's style. Cold whites, orchids, shiny metal chairs. Nothing of Caleb, nothing of the Middleton family. After the wedding, I thought they'd get their own place, but then Caleb said, "We'll stay with you for a bit, until we find the right house." I agreed. Even if I felt a twinge of worry, I wanted to believe. What mother doesn't want a little more time with her child? Stay for a bit, stretched without end. In less than a month, Riley's decor took over. Gray velvet pillows, glass vases, a modern silver rug. The house should feel fresher, she said. Old colors make people sluggish. I smiled and said, as long as Caleb likes it. But within weeks I realized staying for a bit wasn't the right phrase. Riley started setting rules. She swapped the cream curtains for icy white to reflect light better. She moved Theo's small memorial shelf to another corner because it threw off the living room's balance. She hung her and Caleb's wedding photo in the center of the room, where Theo's smiling garden portrait used to be. I didn't argue, but every time I walked through, I felt cold. A house once full of sunlight now glared harsh, sterile, emotionless like her gaze. Riley talked a lot about minimalism, function, and increasing property value. One afternoon she asked, "Do you know homes around here are skyrocketing? If you sell now, you'll double your money for sure." I answered plainly, "I'm not selling." She smiled, softer. "Of course, no need to sell now. It's just maybe one day you'd want somewhere quieter. Seniors often prefer communities with care and friends their age. I know some lovely places with a lake and yoga rooms." I set my teacup down and looked her in the eye. "Thanks, but I'm fine here." She went quiet, but I saw a faint smile like someone laying the first brick of a long plan. That night, Caleb came home late. When I told him what Riley had said, he just laughed. "She's only looking out for you. I think she really wants you to be comfortable." I went silent. Since when did Riley's words carry more weight than his mother's? I went upstairs and stood at the window, looking out at the rose garden. Theo's dark crimson roses were in their best bloom, heartbreakingly beautiful. But as the breeze passed, the petals fell, tapping the steps one by one, like a reminder, everything gets replaced if you don't hold it fast. I closed the window, sat down at my desk, and opened my old journal. That day's entry. Riley walked into my house in high heels and syrupy compliments. But in that smile, I heard measuring like a hammer tapping walls to find the weakest spot to strike. I don't know when my life started to change course. I only know that from the day Riley crossed Middleton House's threshold, my peace left with Theo's warmth. From the day she came in, Middleton House stopped being a home and became a stage she directed. Caleb played the perfect husband, and I was a dated prop pushed out of frame. The parties began. First, intimate dinners with Caleb's coworkers, then Riley's college group weekends, then birthdays, anniversaries, yoga meetups, Sunday brunches, week after week. A house once quiet and smelling of Theo's apple pie now thumped with electronic music and reeked of wine and heavy perfume so strong I had to shut my bedroom door. I often asked gently, "Riley, could you let me know a few days ahead so I can prep the kitchen?" She smiled and answered breezily, "Oh, you don't need to worry. These are young people parties. You just rest. Relax, okay?" I nodded, but I understood that in Riley's dictionary, rest meant stay away. One August evening, I went down for water and found Riley at the doorway, blocking me with a polite smile. "Mrs. Janice, guests are using the karaoke downstairs. It's loud. Maybe turn in early?" Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were hard as glass. I turned back upstairs without a word. As my door closed, I heard her call down. She finally got the message. I didn't turn on the light. I just sat there in the dark, listening to the music below, the laughter, the clink of glasses, the heels on hardwood, each sound designed, it seemed, to remind me I no longer belonged here. From that day, new rules started appearing. Riley taped a note on the fridge. "Please do not use the washing machine after 7 p.m. to avoid disturbing the neighbors." Then came, "Keep the living room at 70 degrees Fahrenheit. The AC can't handle anything higher." And finally, "If you use the kitchen, clean it right after you cook." 3 notes, 3 signatures at the bottom. Riley, "No, Mom. No, Janice. Just orders." I let out a bitter laugh. Back then, Theo used to stick notes on the fridge for me, also 3. "Remember breakfast. Don't forget your meds. I love you." Now, that spot holds only cold slips of paper like a dorm rule board. The physical changes crept in quietly but relentlessly. The cream curtains, Theo chose sun-washed yellow that kept the room warm even in winter, were replaced with minimalist gray ones, pulled shut all day like they were afraid of letting light in. The hand-woven rug from my mother disappeared too, swapped for a cold industrial carpet with no scent and no soul. Riley called it modern minimalism. I called it erasing the past. Even the oak dining table where Theo used to read the Sunday paper was pushed into the garage. In its place stood a glass table with shiny steel legs. She said, "Young people don't like old furniture. It feels heavy." I was going to say that old things are what give a house its memories, but I stayed quiet because for some people, memories are just clutter. One late night, I overheard a conversation I'll never forget. I was heading down for water, stepping softly so I wouldn't wake anyone. But Riley's voice floated from the living room low and even, like a knife sliding across a tabletop. "This house is too big for 3 people. I think Mom should move into Silver Oaks. It's clean, comfortable, with nurses on staff. She'll be happier there than here." Caleb's voice came, soft. "I don't know. Mom's never lived away from home." "I know, but you have to be realistic. We need our own space. This is the time to start a young family's life." I heard the emphasis on young family. Then, a stretch of silence. After that, Riley again, quiet but clear. "You don't want our kid growing up in a house full of old stuff and shadows of the past, right?" I stood in the dark, gripping the glass so hard it nearly cracked. Caleb didn't object. He just said, low and sad, "Maybe I'll talk to Mom later." In that moment, I didn't just hear sadness. I heard a small seed of greed sprouting in my son's voice. After that, I started retreating from my own home. I cooked less, mostly bread or soup. I stopped turning on the TV at night. I stopped walking around the house partly to avoid bumping into Riley's guests, partly because I was tired of hearing her call me Janice flatly in front of others. First it was Mom, then Mrs. Middleton, and now just Janice. From her mouth, that name carried no respect, only sweet contempt. Once, at dinner, in front of their friends, Riley smiled and said, "Janice is a bit particular, but she has a good heart." The whole table laughed. I set my knife down, kept a small smile, then excused myself to go upstairs. On the way up, I heard Riley murmur, "See? Told you. If you're gentle, she'll listen." I closed my bedroom door, leaned against the wood, and for the first time in years, I felt truly invisible. The upstairs bedroom became my entire world. I kept a teapot ready, a few old books, a small lamp on the desk. Every morning I opened the window to look at the rose garden Theo planted. The flowers still bloomed and swayed in the wind, as if nothing outside had changed. But inside me, something was closing bit by bit. I started documenting more carefully, not just a journal records. I wrote down everything Riley changed: the day she swapped the curtains, the day she taped the note on the fridge, the first day she called me Janice. I wrote down that late-night conversation word for word, every Silver Oaks, every Our Own Space. Not for revenge, but because I knew there would come a time I'd need proof to remind someone that I was still clear-minded. Caleb spoke less and met my eyes even less. I didn't blame him. Someone caught between his wife and his mother sometimes stays quiet out of cowardice, sometimes out of fear. I don't know which one my son was, but I knew that each time I looked at him, my heart clenched because in his eyes, love was slowly turning into obligation. One night, after the music downstairs finally stopped, I sat at my desk, switched on the small lamp, and opened the old leather notebook. That day's page read, "They don't know I spent a lifetime protecting this home from storms, debt, and bitter winters. But the worst storm didn't come from outside. It came from the very person I once held in my arms." I closed the notebook, stood, and looked at Theo's photo on the wall. In the frame, he still smiled, a rose stem in his hand. I told him softly, "I still remember what you said. I won't let anyone push me out." Moonlight spilled into the room, touching the edge of the desk and reflecting off the frame. I saw myself there, a small figure, silver hair, but bright eyes. I knew the fight hadn't begun, but I was ready. I was no longer the gentle mother shoved into the shadows. I was the woman who would prove that when an elderly woman is treated as invisible, that's when she becomes most dangerous. My 71st birthday arrived quietly. I hadn't planned a party, just wanted to brew some tea, set Theo's freshly cut roses on the table, and sit under the porch to watch the sun. But Riley said, "You have to let me do it. A proper party will show everyone you're still healthy and elegant." I didn't argue. I was tired of small fights. What I learned after 70 years is this: sometimes silence is stronger than a reaction. I just didn't know that night the proper Riley talked about was really a trap wrapped in lights and flowers. That morning, while I was arranging gifts for the guests, Riley walked into my room, silk blouse, hair in a high bun, perfume sharp as a blade. Her voice was cold, hard, so precise I thought she'd practiced every word. "Today you should decide your future." I looked up, thinking she'd misspoken. "My future? What do you mean?" She met my eyes without a flicker. "We need this house. It's time for you to move somewhere more suitable. Silver Oaks has a room available I already checked. You'll have care and friends your age." My hands started to shake. I slowly set my teacup down, afraid a slip would make the whole room hear the shattering of trust. "You want to throw me out of my home?" Riley gave a small laugh. "Don't make it sound so harsh. I just want things clear so everyone can be comfortable." On the table lay a stack of papers. I knew what it was before she said a word. "Just a small formality sign to transfer the title, so later Caleb and I won't have to worry. I'll make sure you have the best nursing home. Money's not an issue." I shook my head. "I'm not signing." My voice was so steady it surprised even me. Riley stared at me, the smile thinning, a flash of irritation in her eyes. "If you won't sign, I can't guarantee Caleb will stay patient. He's under a lot of stress." The words dropped into the room like a stone. I stood, keeping my voice from shaking. "Don't use my son's name to threaten me." She shrugged, gathered the papers, and said icily, "Then have a very memorable birthday." When she left, I sat down, opened the drawer, and took out the camera drive to check. Every file of activity in the house, dates, images, audio, everything intact. I saved another copy to the cloud, changed the password, and put it back in the wardrobe. I don't know when the shaking began. Maybe when I realized the thing Theo feared was actually happening. They didn't see me as a mother anymore. I was just an obstacle between them and this house. In the afternoon, while I was trying to fix my makeup, the door burst open. Riley again. No knock, no permission. In her hand was my jewelry box, the dark wooden one Theo gave me on our 10th anniversary. I heard the lock click, the clink of bracelets and earrings. "What are you doing with my things?" She didn't look up, just said, "Picking a necklace to match your dress." I stepped closer and yanked the box from her hand. "No one touches my keepsakes." A spark flashed in her eyes, then shifted into a smile. "You should calm down. You're making people think you can't control your emotions." Before I could answer, she shoved my shoulder. It happened in a second. My back slammed into the dresser edge. My head hit the wood. A sharp pain shot across my temple. The world spun. When I opened my eyes, Riley was adjusting her bracelet, looking at me like nothing had happened. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, even a small fall is dangerous." When I hit the floor, I didn't just lose my balance. I lost my faith in family. If you were me in that moment, what would you do? Stay silent or stand up for justice? Tell me what you honestly think. I want to hear your answer. Then she left the room, and I sat on the floor, head buzzing, heart pounding. I didn't cry. I pressed a cold cloth to the swelling and looked in the mirror. My left eye was turning black and blue. I took a deep breath, picked up my foundation, and tried to cover it. Through the streaks of powder and tears, I saw my face older but not weaker. I changed into the emerald dress. Theo once said, "Makes you look like spring in a winter room." It used to be the color of hope. Now it was the color of calm and preparation. Downstairs, the music started. I smelled wine, lavender, candles. Riley had invited more people than I imagined: Caleb's coworkers, her friends, neighbors, even a few I'd only met once at Theo's funeral. Everything gleamed silver, from the backdrop and balloons to the cake. On the gift table, a card read, "Happy 71st, Janice, to new beginnings." I walked down the stairs, one step at a time. Conversations stopped, then the murmurs began. Some people looked at me, others avoided my eyes. Riley rushed over, voice sweet. "Mom, why aren't you resting? You should be upstairs." I looked at her, then at Caleb, standing with a champagne flute. "Why? This is my house." The air froze. A guest gave an awkward chuckle and raised a glass. Caleb lowered his voice. "Mom, don't make a scene. Riley's just worried about you." I spoke slowly, loud enough for everyone to hear. "She's not worried about me. She wants me out of the house." A soft "oh" rippled through the room. Riley smiled, but her lips trembled. "Listen, everyone. What is Mom even saying? You're misunderstanding me." Caleb set his glass down and gripped my shoulder, voice hard. "Please stop. This is your birthday. I don't want to fight in front of our friends." I looked at my only son and saw only embarrassment in his eyes, not concern. Martin, my older brother, had been quiet nearby. When Caleb finished, he stepped forward, voice low and sharp. "What did you just say to your mother, Caleb?" "I just want to protect your wife by humiliating the woman who gave you life." He turned to Riley. "You hit my sister, didn't you?" Riley scoffed. "I don't know what you're talking about." Martin pointed at the bruise on my face, voice rising. She fell on her own, huh?" The room buzzed. Someone whispered, "Mrs. Janice seems fine to me." Another answered, "What kind of daughter-in-law talks like that?" Caleb turned to Martin. "You don't understand. This is a family matter," Martin barked, loud enough to fill the room. "Family? If your father were alive, he'd be ashamed of how you treat your mother." The air grew so heavy it was hard to breathe. Riley forced a tight smile. Caleb looked down, cheeks flushed. I stood still, cold cloth to my eye, feeling my heartbeat slow. I wasn't shaking anymore, because I knew in this moment I wasn't alone. Then the doorbell rang, soft, but in the taut air, it sounded like a verdict. Riley squeezed Caleb's hand and whispered, "Who's coming now?" I smiled, the one I'd been preparing all day. Probably someone bringing a special birthday gift for me. The door opened. Nora Park walked in, calm, a red-sealed envelope in her hand. She nodded to the guests, eyes on me. "Sorry I'm late, Mrs. Middleton. I have a few things to announce right here, in front of everyone." The room went dead quiet. Riley gripped Caleb's hand, face pale, and I stood tall, adjusted my dress, and for the first time that night, I could breathe. On my 71st birthday, they thought I was just a frail old woman backed into a corner. But in a few minutes, they would learn that the person they tried to erase from this house was the one who wrote its rules. When Nora began to speak, the room seemed to hold its breath. I stood in, the windows light, warm gold behind me. Riley's fingers trembled where they clutched Caleb's hand, though she tried to look composed. Martin stood at my side, eyes stern, shoulder angled forward forward like a wall, ready to block any blow. Nora opened the red envelope and pulled out papers stamped with the court seal. Her voice was even and clear, each word landing like a gavel strike. Under Clause 14 of Mr. Theodore Middleton's will, this house is under the full ownership of Mrs. Janice Middleton. However, there is a special provision, commonly referred to as a protective inheritance reversal clause. She looked up, gaze sweeping the room. It means that if the current inheritor misses, Janice is forced, coerced, or pressured to sell, transfer, or vacate this property, then ownership will not pass to any family member. Instead, it will go directly to the Hartwell Veterans Retirement Fund, a nonprofit Mr. Middleton supported during his lifetime. A wave of murmurs rose. Someone muttered, "So if they push her out, they lose everything?" Riley turned pale, lips trembling. Caleb looked at me like, for the first time, he could hear his father's voice from the grave. Nora went on, calm, but edged with legal steel. "Mr. Middleton wrote, if there is any act of coercion toward my wife, the asset shall be immediately removed from the family line. No exceptions." She paused, then added softly, "Therefore, if tonight there is any evidence that Mrs. Middleton was forced to leave this home or subjected to violence or threats, this property will immediately belong to the Hartwell Fund, bypassing Caleb Middleton." I looked at Riley. She swallowed hard, fingers digging into Caleb's wrist until her knuckles whitened. Caleb slid his arm away without meeting her eyes. The room shifted. The music was off. The guests who'd only come to celebrate were silent now. A woman near the door sighed. Mr. Theodore really planned ahead. Riley gave a strained smile, trying to steady her voice. "I don't understand. Why read a dead man's will at a birthday party? That's disrespectful." Nora didn't answer. She opened her briefcase, pulled a slim file, and flipped to the first page. "Because 3 weeks ago, you, Riley Sloan Middleton, hired an appraisal firm in Franklin County to assess this house." She held up the document for all to see the company logo and Riley's signature. "The invoice states you paid, with an email request for an estimated value after the owner vacates." Riley stepped forward, voice pitched high. "I was just curious. I only wanted to know what our family's asset is worth. That's all." Nora's expression didn't change. "Really? Then what about this email to a law office the following week?" She pulled out a color print and read, crisp and clear. "If an elderly person shows signs of confusion or obstructs family assets, what is the legal process to declare them incompetent? Sender r.sloan@.com." A few guests gaped. Caleb shut his eyes, drew a deep breath, fists clenched. I felt my heartbeat slow. I said nothing. I just looked at Riley and let her sink under the rising tide of whispers. She stepped back half a pace, lips working. I was only asking. I didn't." Martin cut in, voice like thunder. "Nobody just asks that unless they mean to do it." Nora nodded at me. I understood. It was time to show everything. I pulled out my phone and opened the security camera app. The screen lit Riley's face. 1 second, 2, and the video played. Me in my bedroom, Riley at my jewelry box. Everything clear to the last detail. Audio filled the room. "What are you doing with my things?" "Picking a necklace to match your dress." "No one touches my keepsakes." "You're making people think you can't control your emotions." Then the shove. Clear as day. I fell. My head hit the dresser edge. The dry thud made the whole room flinch. A few guests covered their mouths. Others backed away. A middle-aged man blurted, "My God, she clearly pushed her." A woman turned on Caleb, furious. "You stood there and let your wife do that?" Riley went white but forced a shaky smile. "No, she slipped. She just lost her balance." Nora paused the video, then replayed the moment right after the fall where Riley's voice was flat and cold. "You should be more careful, Janice. At your age, even a small fall is dangerous." The room went stone silent. Nora looked straight at Riley, her voice lowered but carrying. "That's not how a daughter-in-law talks to a mother-in-law. That's a threat." I heard Martin exhale, then murmur to me, like it was just for us, "You did the right thing by not staying silent." Caleb stood in the middle, blood drained from his face. He looked at me, then at Riley. His mouth opened, but no sound came. Riley clutched his arm, pleading, "Honey, I swear I didn't mean." "Things it. I only wanted to keep Mom safe. I never meant to hurt her." No one believed her. The guests watched her like a clumsy actress forgetting her lines. An older woman, Theo's friend, stepped forward, voice shaky but firm. "I've seen this before. It's called emotional and physical domestic abuse. No shouting needed, just one shove and a few lies are enough." Many nodded. Someone whispered, "Mrs. Janice deserves protection." Riley snapped at Nora. "You have no right to read all this here. This is a private matter." Nora replied evenly, "Not private anymore, Miss Sloane. When there's evidence of abuse, the law has a say." She closed the file and turned to Caleb. "I advise you to have her leave this house tonight. If not, I'll file a report with the court in the morning." Riley backed away, eyes wet but tears nowhere to be found. She looked to Martin like he might defend her, but he only folded his arms and said coldly, "She's not taking one more step up those stairs." All eyes followed Riley as she spun in place under the stairs. Her voice broke. I only wanted to build this family." Nora cut in. "Families aren't built on lies and coercion, miss." "Riley, they're built on respect, something you never showed your mother-in-law." Riley looked around, frantic, then turned to Caleb, the last branch within reach. "Say something, please." Caleb stared at her, lips trembling, voice so small I had to strain to hear. "I don't know anymore." I had never seen my son like that, standing between two worlds, both collapsing. On one side, the wife he once trusted. On the other, the mother he forgot to protect. Now everything lay bare before everyone, with nowhere left to hide. Riley burst into real tears, high, shrill, sobbing, but no one came near. No one offered comfort. Guests began slipping out of the room, quietly, like people leaving a courtroom after the verdict has been read. Martin still blocked the stairs. Nora slid the files back into her briefcase, then said softly, "Mrs. Middleton, you can rest easy. No one is going to push you out of this house anymore." I looked around the room, still glittered with silver. The ribbons Riley had hung were there, but everything felt cold and hollow. Riley stood there, makeup smeared, eyes desperate. Caleb lowered his head, as if he had just realized he'd lost something he could never get back. My 71st birthday didn't end with congratulations, it ended with the silence of a sentence just handed down. And in the middle of a house once built on love, those two young people, one fell from the peak of arrogance, and the other fell into a pit of guilt. Riley froze at the door, hair in disarray, mascara streaked like ash. When Nora motioned for her to leave, Riley suddenly whipped around, screeching like someone unhinged. "I'm Caleb's wife. I have a right to be here. I have a right to this house." The whole room went dead silent. Caleb stood just a few steps away, head bowed, arms hanging at his sides. Nora answered calmly, her voice light but cold enough to bite. "Your rights, Mrs. Middleton, do not include taking, coercing, or using violence against someone." She paused a beat, then enunciated each word, "especially not against an elderly mother in her own home." Riley opened her mouth to argue, but Martin's stare stopped her short. He stood at the foot of the stairs, broad-shouldered, steady as a wall. The light hit his face hard and resolute. She backed away, heels clacking on the wood floor. Each step sounded like a hammer, sealing shut the pretense of this proper birthday party. When the door closed behind Riley, the house fell quiet again, a heavy silence, but a clean one. Nora gathered her files and set them on the table. "Things are stable for now, but I suggest changing the locks tonight, and if they come back, call me or the police." I nodded, my voice hoarse. "Thank you, Nora. Without you, I would have lost everything." She smiled. "No, Mrs. Janice. A woman like you isn't easily stripped of anything." When everyone left, only 3 of us remained. Me, Martin, and Caleb. The living room lights were still on, but that light wasn't warm anymore. It shone straight on my only son's face, the face that once made me believe my love could redeem any mistake. Caleb stepped closer and spoke softly. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't know things were this bad. I thought Riley just wanted to take pressure off you." I looked at him. My lips trembled, but I didn't let the tears fall. "You defended the person who hit your mother in front of a crowd, Caleb." The words came out gently, but I knew they pierced the deepest part of him. Caleb lowered his head. I saw his shoulders shake, as if the weight of the whole evening had just landed on him. Martin stood near the window, looking out at the roses. His voice was low and firm. "Caleb, I think it's best if you stay elsewhere for a few days. Let your mother have peace of mind. I didn't mean, I know, but sometimes consequences don't require their intent. I turned away. I didn't want to watch my son's eyes brim like a scolded child. In this house, every breath felt heavy. All I could hear was Theo's old clock ticking steady, like the heartbeat of the dead still keeping watch. Caleb moved out before midnight. I stood on the porch as he carried his suitcase to the car. The headlights washed over his face, tired, smeared, young again, like the day he left for college. He hugged me, awkward and weak. "I'm sorry, Mom. I don't know how to start over." I squeezed his hand lightly. "You start by telling the truth, Caleb. Time will teach you the rest." He nodded, turned away, then looked back before getting in. In his eyes, I saw regret, fear, and loss all mixed together. I felt myself tremble, not from the cold. I was saying goodbye to the son I thought I knew best and the one who it hurt me most. When the car pulled down the drive and the red taillights faded into the night, I closed the door, leaned against the wood, and exhaled a long breath. The house held only the wind again. I sat on the sofa, hands still shaking, a hollow spreading from my chest to my stomach, as if someone had just removed part of my spirit. Close to 1 o'clock in the morning, my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, but I didn't need to guess. I knew it was Riley. The screen glowed in the dark, each word stark and cold. "Be realistic. I have photos, a story, and a few friends in media. If you don't want this in the news, send $60,000. I'll leave quietly and won't make a mess. You have 48 hours. I stared at the screen, my hands going rigid. $60,000. Not a huge sum compared to my assets, but filthy dirty like her hands. I set the phone on the table and slowly dialed Nora. Her voice came after a few rings. "Mrs. Janice, I'm guessing you just got a message. You already knew?" I anticipated it. People like Riley always think they can turn the tide with blackmail. What should I do? Don't pay a cent. Her threats have no legal basis. Keep the message, take screenshots, and tomorrow morning I'll send a packet to the local police. I was silent for a few seconds, then said quietly, "Thank you, Nora. I don't want to live afraid anymore. You don't have to be. The law is on your side now." I hung up and walked around the house. The hallway light cast reflections on our family photos, me, Theo, and little Caleb. I stopped at a picture of the three of us in the rose garden in 1998. Theo's smile warmed me, then tightened my chest. If he were alive, he wouldn't be surprised. Theo always said, "Evil inside a home doesn't need a gun, just a cold sentence and a weak man." I brushed my fingers over his face in the photo and whispered, "I kept our home, Theo. But the price of truth is always higher than we think." I didn't sleep that night. I brewed a pot of black tea and sat by the window watching the moon. Before sunrise, I called the locksmith, an old acquaintance of Martin's. He arrived at 5 a.m., carrying a set of brand new smart locks. "You want everything changed? All of it? Front door, back door, and the garage?" "Yes, ma'am." I watched him work. The drill and metal clicks were soft, but to me they sounded like the music of freedom. Every tightened screw, every new bolt was a step in reclaiming my ownership, not just of the house, but of my life. After he left, I took photos of every bit of damage Riley had left behind. A scratch on the dresser, a stained cushion, a strip of peeled paint in the hall. I saved everything with timestamps into a folder titled Temporary File 12:40 a.m. When I finished, I opened my old leather notebook and wrote, "Tonight, my house is as quiet as the first night Theo brought me here. I'm not afraid anymore. I've seen with my own eyes once people show their true face. Nothing more needs to be said. Dirty money can't buy peace. And those who wield family as a weapon will, sooner or later, be devoured by their own greed." I closed the notebook, turned off the light, and looked out at the roses. The early breeze moved through the leaves and brushed the cream curtains I had just put back the color Theo once chose. For the first time in months, I felt I could sleep. Not because I had won, but because I no longer had to curl up and endure. The house was quiet, and so was my heart, and I knew dawn was coming, the first morning of a life where I was truly the owner of myself. 3 days after the night we parted ways, my house was truly quiet for the first time. No more high heels on the stairs, no cloying perfume trapped in the curtains. I woke early, made tea, and put on Theo's old jazz. Autumn leaves drifted through the kitchen, slow and warm, like the breath of memories finding their way back. But the peace didn't last long. That morning, Caleb called. His voice was raw, not like someone just waking up, but like a man who hadn't slept in days. "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet." I hesitated. "Who?" "A woman named Jade Alvarez. She's a private investigator I hired." "Don't worry, Mom. She's helping me find the truth about Riley." I was silent for a few seconds. Hearing that name tightened something inside me, not out of fear, but because I had waited for this for so long. They came that afternoon. Jade was mid-30s, short black hair, quick movements, eyes sharp like someone who has seen too many tricks. She shook my hand, voice low and clear. "I've reviewed the file. You should brace yourself." She opened her briefcase and spread thick documents on the table. Caleb sat across from me, fingers knotted, face pale. The first page was a photo of Riley, fresh-faced, perfect smile, sparkling eyes. Jade flipped to the second page, her voice steady. "Her legal name is Riley Ann Sloan, 36. But in a 2018 court file, she used the name Riley Anderson. At the time, she was living with a widower named Charles Denton, 15 years older." Jade glanced at me. "After 2 years, he was out more than $90,000, including gambling loans in his name with a forged signature." Caleb squeezed his hands until his knuckles went white. I said nothing. I listened. Jade continued. "After that, Riley left the state and switched her last name back to Sloan. Her financial records show she owes about $45,000 to a gambling company in Nevada. That may be why she needed a new target." She slid over a printout, an email screenshot to a real estate agent. Subject line: Inquiry. Selling a property when the owner is declared incapacitated. Date: 3 months ago. Sender: R. Sloanat. Jade tapped the line, her voice cool. That's when she started the plan. A chill ran down my spine. Every piece fit like a terrible puzzle I didn't want to see. Jade went on. "People like Riley don't attack with brute force. They use manipulation. She isolates the victim from the few people who could help. I call it a map of isolation." She pulled a diagram, my name, Janice Middleton, in the center. Around it, Caleb, Martin, old friends, neighbors, attorney, church group. Arrows and little notes between each. Examples: Tell Caleb, Mom criticizes his wife to sow division. Block Janice from contacting Martin, say he's negative. Change locks. Control phone communication. Caleb stared at the page, eyes wide. She really wrote this? There's a similar draft on her computer, saved in a folder called Plans. I recovered it from a temp drive. I swallowed. Those lines weren't just strategy, they were a predator's map. Each arrow was a cold slash across my trust. Caleb's trust. Everyone's. Caleb looked up, voice tight. "Mom, I don't know how I didn't see it sooner. She made me believe you were resisting, that you didn't like anyone getting close. She said you criticized her, said you wanted to control me." I looked at my son, and my heart twisted. Caleb went on. "I thought I was protecting my wife, but I helped someone trying to destroy my mother." He covered his face with his hands, shoulders shaking. Jade glanced at me and gave a small nod as if to say, "Let him sit with it." I understood. Forgiving too quickly can make people think the wound didn't hurt. I set my hand on the table, my voice calm but not soft. "Caleb, I don't need an apology right now. I need boundaries. I need to know that from now on, I won't be put in a position where I have to prove I'm not crazy, not cruel, not weak." Caleb lifted his head, eyes wet. "I understand. You have that right, and I'm going to use it." Nora arrived the next afternoon with a stack of papers and a hot coffee. "I've prepared a temporary restraining order. Riley is barred from coming within 100 yards of you, and she cannot contact you by phone or email." She placed the documents in front of me, then looked at Caleb. "If she tries to reach you, record it and save the evidence. Don't respond. We'll handle it legally." Caleb nodded, but his eyes were far away. Maybe his head still churned with questions. Why did she do it? Why didn't I see? Sometimes the questions matter less than knowing where to stop. That night, after everyone left, I sat alone on the sofa and stared out the window. A light rain had started. The street lamp cast warm bands of gold across the wall through the curtains. I turned on the news home prices rising, real estate fraud in a neighboring state. I smiled bitterly. Somewhere inside those dry numbers live stories like mine, elders hunted through their trust and their love. I remembered the night Riley taped the "no washing machine after 7 p.m. note on the fridge. I thought I was just being accommodating. Now I see each note was one step erasing my freedom. Worse, I let her do it before I realized. I went upstairs, sat at my desk, and opened the old notebook. On the page I wrote, what Riley wanted wasn't just money, but control. She didn't steal with a gun. She used a smile, and you should get some rest. Some predators wear the costume of family, and only when you've lost almost everything do you see their claws. I set down the pen and sighed. Outside, the rain softened to wind along the eaves. For the first time in weeks, I didn't lie awake fearing the door would open at midnight. I didn't wait for Riley's footsteps in the hall. I turned off the light, lay down, and listened to my heart beat evenly. A gentle sleep came like Theo's hand on my shoulder when he'd say, "It's done, love." Tonight I knew I was truly safe, and when moonlight poured through the window, I smiled because at last the predator had been unmasked and the prey had learned to protect herself. 2 weeks after Jade turned everything over to Nora, the first news hit like a cold slap. Riley filed for divorce. She demanded financial compensation for sacrificing her career to support her husband and listed a long set of claims. Half the marital assets, $75,000 for emotional damages, and even temporary right to stay at the Middleton house to stabilize her life. I read the copy of the petition and felt my heartbeat slow. I wasn't surprised. To people like Riley, failure is just a setup for bargaining. But this time, she picked the wrong opponent. Nora called me the morning she got the file. Her voice was calm with a hint of dry irony. She wants money for sacrificing her career? When all income for the last 3 years was charged on Caleb's credit cards in your name. I let out a quiet breath. She never really worked. I know, and now we'll prove it in court. 3 days later, Nora filed an official response with a wall of evidence attached. The video of Riley shoving me, the appraisal invoice and emails to an agent before she planned to sell the house. Investigator Jade's report on her history of financial fraud, gambling debts, and forged signatures. The blackmail messages after she left, plus bank statements showing transfers from an online gambling account. Nora said, "When the court sees this file, they'll understand sacrificed career is just lipstick over deception." I sat in the law office, listening to Nora on the phone with Riley's attorney. Her tone was cool, sharp as a blade. Instead of demands, your client should focus on cooperation. We've submitted evidence of abuse, and under California Family Code Section 4320, that conduct directly impacts asset division. On the bun. Other end, I imagine they were sweating. A week later, the temporary hearing was held. A small courtroom, low ceiling, cold white lights. I sat behind Nora, hands steady. Caleb was there too, pale, like a man relearning how to breathe. When Riley walked in, she looked different, hair hastily tied, blotchy makeup, none of her old swagger in her eyes. But the moment she sat, she gave me a half smile, as if she still believed she could flip the board. The judge, an older, stern woman, flipped through the thick stack Nora had filed. After 10 minutes, she looked up. "I've seen the video and the emails." Her gaze settled on Riley for a few seconds. "Mrs. Sloan Middleton, per the rules, I'm granting a temporary restraining order of 200 yards. Her voice was even, each word falling like stone. "Additionally, I recommend you pause all financial claims until the forensic audit is complete." Riley gaped, ready to speak, but her attorney tugged her sleeve for silence. Caleb stared down, eyes red. I only gave the judge a small nod, a quiet thank you. On our way out, Nora murmured, "I expect they'll propose a settlement soon." Exactly as she said. 2 days later, Riley's side emailed. Her lawyer used gentle phrasing, a conditional financial mediation to protect both parties' reputations. I looked at Nora and asked, "What does both parties' reputations mean?" She smiled. "It means they want money to disappear quietly." I asked, "And you?" "I think there aren't two sides here. There's a victim and a user." We didn't respond. 3 days later, they went silent. The media pressure Riley once threatened never materialized. No outlet had a story to print. They all knew touching a file under protective order could earn them a countersuit. A few of Caleb's friends whispered that Riley had bragged she'd get the mother-in-law on TV, but within 2 weeks, the name Riley Middleton vanished from forums as if she'd never existed. I didn't feel triumphant. What I felt was a strange emptiness. That woman caused so many cracks, yet when she disappeared, all I heard was a long stretch of quiet. That quiet, heavy as it was the beginning of peace. Caleb started therapy on Nora's advice. He texted me, "I need to understand why I didn't see the truth sooner." I read it and didn't reply. I know awakening doesn't come in a single night. A week later, the post office brought a hand-addressed envelope. Caleb's handwriting. I opened it. Just a few lines scribbled. "Mom, it took me 3 months to accept that Riley wasn't the person I loved. She was the person I needed to learn a lesson from. I'm not asking you to forgive me yet, but I want you to know I'm learning how to be your son again. I love you, and I'm sorry." I folded the letter and carefully placed it in the drawer with my journal. I didn't write back, not because I was angry, but because I wasn't ready. Some cracks need time to dry before you touch them. I spent the rest of my time in the rose garden. The deep purple rose bushes Theo planted years ago had grown wide, shading the path. I trimmed the dry branches, built up the roots, fertilized, and watered them early in the morning. Each time dew fell onto a petal, I felt time healing me. These past months, I took up my nightly journaling again. No longer recording events, just reminders to myself. Freedom doesn't come from winning a case. It comes from no longer being controlled by fear. A house isn't where you live, it's where you're respected. One morning at the end of the month, Nora called. "Have you heard? Riley left the state." I frowned slightly. Left? Yes. Creditors found her. She owes on credit cards, gambling, even legal fees. No one knows exactly where she went. Police only said she sold the Lexus and disappeared in Nevada. I was quiet for a moment. Maybe that's the price of lying. Nora nodded over the phone. For people like her, things don't end in court. They end in oblivion. I stood on the balcony, watching the morning sun come through the roses. A light breeze carried the smell of damp earth, the scent of something restored to its rightful owner. I knew this wasn't a happy ending in the fairy tale sense. But to me, victory wasn't seeing the wicked punished. It was living without fear of a knock at midnight. I closed the garden gate and went back inside. In the kitchen, the teapot was still steaming. My notebook lay open on the table, and beside it was Caleb's letter, the one I still hadn't answered. I set a freshly cut rose on top and whispered, "Maybe someday I'll write back when we both have the courage to start over." Outside, light slipped through the glass and touched Theo's photo on the wall. His smile was gentle, as if saying, "You kept the house, Janice." And for the first time in years, I believed he was. Right. One early fall morning, the phone rang. I recognized Caleb's voice, low, slow, without the rush of a man who used to end every call with, "I'm busy, Mom. Mom, I want to see you." "Not at the house, if that's hard for you." "At Rosewood Park. Tomorrow morning?" I paused for a few seconds. Since that birthday night, we'd only exchanged short texts. Not out of hate, but because I needed space to look at everything. "All right," I said. "Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Rosewood is the park Theo loved." He'd say, "What's more peaceful than a place people visit just to look at trees?" I arrived early and sat on a bench by the pond. Maple leaves lay everywhere, gold and orange along the path. Soft sunlight skimmed the water like a thin silk sheet. Caleb was 10 minutes late. He wore a gray jacket, hair cut shorter, thinner than before. As he came closer, I noticed the biggest change. His eyes no longer carried certainty, they held caution, the kind that appears when someone truly starts looking at himself. He sat without meeting my eyes. After a moment, he spoke. "Mom, there's something I have to say." I kept quiet. Caleb took a long breath. When Riley started talking about rearranging the house, I didn't protest. Truth is, part of me agreed. A part of me, Mom, wanted that house too. Not because I needed it, but because I thought I deserved it after Dad died, after all those years there. He gave a tight laugh, eyes wet. I kept telling myself I was just helping you get organized, but really I was helping myself feel in control. I was greedy, Mom. Not for money, for control. Riley saw that and fed it with praise. "You're the only one strong enough to run this family," she said, and I believed her. He shook his head, voice catching. "I let a stranger stranger turn my pride into a weapon against my own mother. I stayed silent. Some things can't be interrupted. Words wedged in the middle can snap the fragile line of courage just forming. Caleb went on, I'm not asking you to forgive me yet. I just want you to know I'm learning to face who I really am. Not the perfect son, not the rock, but someone who was weak, who was selfish. I looked at my son, the man I thought I'd lost forever. I spoke quietly, each word clear. Owning the mistake is the first step, Caleb. Repairing it is the long road. He nodded, eyes red. I know. And I'm ready to walk it, however long it takes. We sat watching the water for a long while. A duck glided by, leaving small ripples that faded away. I took a long breath and said, if you truly want to repair this, we'll start small. Caleb looked up, eyes expectant. We'll meet once a week, in public, like this park. For the first 3 meetings, no talk about the house. Okay, he answered softly. I agree. We'll talk about what made you the person you are today, and what made me the mother you forgot. Caleb smiled a little. For the first time in months, you still teach like when I was a kid. People don't stop being mothers when their children grow up, Caleb. They just change how they teach. In the weeks after, we kept our agreement. In week 1, Caleb talked about therapy, the program Nora recommended. He said the therapist helped him see the barrier with Mom formed after Dad died. I was afraid you were fragile, so I tried to carry everything. But the more I carried, the more I wanted control. And Riley turned control into power, I said softly. Exactly. She made me believe love needs a winner. In week 2, Caleb talked about journaling in therapy. He wrote about being addicted to praise every time Riley said, only you understand me. He felt worthy. She knew exactly how to make me need her. And when I started to doubt, she said you were trying to divide us. A lie is easier to believe than the truth when it's told in a sweet voice, I said, half to him, half to myself. In week 3, we finally talked about me. I told Caleb about the loneliness of an elder stripped of authority in her own home. Do you know what that feels like? When people say you should rest, what they mean is you no longer get to decide. I gave a thin smile, voice unsteady. They don't have to force you out. They just make you feel unnecessary. Caleb bowed his head, voice rough. I made you feel that way. Yes, I nodded. But now you're making me feel heard again. After 3 meetings, we wrote 10 commitments, splitting the page in half. My 5. 1. Not weaponizing the past when you're genuinely trying to repair. 2. Not using my hurt as a weapon. 3. Listening more, speaking less. 4. Teaching from experience, not from guilt. 5. Keeping a path open for mother and son, however narrow. Caleb's 5. 1. Not denying the truth even when it shames me. 2. Not letting anyone come between us again. 3. Not defining love by money or power. Number 4. Respecting the boundaries you set. 5. Remembering kindness has no price, only the condition of honesty. We signed 2 copies, exchanged them, and smiled. Not a cheerful smile, but one lit by a beginning. At the end, Caleb pulled a key ring from his pocket. Mom, I want to return these. I looked and recognized the spare keys to Middleton House, the ones Riley used to keep in her purse. Caleb set them in my hand, voice firm. I don't want the right to enter when you're not there. If you agree, I'd like a guest key only used when you call me or when you're present. I held the keys, heavy like a symbol. Not heavy from metal, but from what they'd represented. The imbalance between trust and betrayal. I spoke slowly. I agree. You can keep a guest key, but remember, I'm offering a chance, not power. Caleb nodded. I understand. I don't want power anymore. I just want my mother back. I had to turn away to hide, the tear that rose. I smiled and answered softly, I'm still here, Caleb. I just don't need to be rescued anymore. We sat a while longer, watching the leaves fall. Far off, children chased each other across the grass, laughter bright in the breeze. Caleb asked, how long do you think until I can come home? I didn't answer right away. I looked up. The light flickered through the leaves. When you truly understand that a home isn't about having keys, it's about having responsibility, I said. Then the door will open by itself. Caleb was quiet, but I saw it in his eyes, a small light, faint but real. I knew he'd started finding himself again. When we said goodbye, he hugged me, not an apology hug, but the embrace of someone who knows he still has a chance. I watched him walk away, the early autumn wind moving through my hair. Inside me, there was no anger, only a small, steady belief that sometimes the hardest thing isn't forgiving someone else, it's being strong enough to forgive while keeping your boundaries. I walked slowly toward the car, feeling a little lighter. In my hand, the keys were cold metal, but in my heart, I knew I was holding something else. Control over a life I thought I'd lost for good. Time moved faster than I expected. Since we met at Rosewood Park, more than 8 months had passed. Winter faded, the garden bloomed again, and Theo's deep purple roses once more lined the path. Every morning I still watered, journaled, brewed tea, and played Fly Me to the Moon, small habits that brought the house back to life piece by piece. Caleb now lives in a small apartment in Maple Grove, about a 15-minute drive from my house. I used to fear that distance would push my son farther away, but it turned out to be the best medicine. Distance helps people see themselves clearly. He lives simply, steady work, paying all his own bills, no more cocktail parties or promising but vague investment schemes. When I visited once, I noticed a small sign on the wall. No debt, no borrowing, no living off anyone. 3 handwritten lines, but I understood. They were Caleb's 3 new boundaries. Then one evening he called, "Mom, I want to introduce someone. No rush, I just think you'll like her." I smiled and asked gently, "What's her name?" "Eva Monroe. She teaches art at the nearby high school." I didn't say it, but a tightness passed through me. I didn't resent Caleb having someone new, I was just afraid of history repeating. At my age, that fear doesn't come from jealousy or control, but from the instinct of someone who's been deeply hurt. We met 3 weeks later. Eva arrived exactly on time, neither early nor late. Mid-30s, short neat brown hair, a pale blue linen dress, a simple silver bracelet at her neck. When she shook my hand, she looked straight at me, her voice warm and clear. "It's very nice to meet you, Mrs. Middleton. Caleb has told me a lot about you." I smiled lightly. "I hope he told the truth." She smiled, eyes bright. "Partly. He's still learning how to tell it correctly." I laughed. No one had ever spoken about Caleb like that. No flattery, no evasion. That coffee went smoothly. Eva spoke just enough, no showiness, no trying to win me over. When Caleb stepped away to order, she turned to me, straightforward. "Please don't worry. I don't want to change him. I only want to walk with him if he truly wants that." I looked at her and felt something settle. For the first time, I saw a woman who wasn't looking for a place in Middleton House, only a place in Caleb's own heart. 2 months later, Caleb called, "Mom, Eva and I are serious, but there's something that surprised me and made me feel lighter." "What is it?" She said if we marry someday, she wants a clear prenup. We each keep our own assets, no entanglement. I fell silent for a few seconds, then laughed. "Then I should send Eva flowers." "I think so too," Caleb said, sounding more at ease than I expected. For the first time, I feel like loving someone doesn't come with duty or power. When Caleb asked about dinner with Eva, I agreed with conditions. A neutral place, not your place, not mine. Okay. And no one mentions the value of the house, not because I'm afraid, but because I want to know what you've truly learned. Caleb was quiet for a few seconds, then said, "I understand." We chose a small restaurant downtown, the one Theo took me to on our first dates. Our table was by the window, facing the lights of passing cars. Eva arrived 5 minutes early and ordered water for the table. When Caleb arrived, she smiled. "I ordered black tea for you. I know you're cutting back on coffee." I noticed the way Caleb looked at her, no worship, like with Riley. It was equality and gratitude. Dinner was warm, no boasting, no scorekeeping. We talked about paintings, books, and teaching. Eva shared stories about difficult but endearing students. I told the story of Theo trying to learn to draw for me and giving up because I drew a cat and it came out a bear. We all laughed, and in that moment, Caleb's smile looked natural, no defenses, no pretense. From that day on, Caleb began making amends with actions, not promises. He came to my house every weekend, fixed the rotting wooden fence out back, repainted the gate, and replaced the hallway bulbs. No fuss, no announcement, just a small note on the kitchen table. "It's done, Mom." Once, he took me to an eye appointment. When I said, "I can drive myself," Caleb just smiled. "I know, but you've taken care of others your whole life. Let me take care of you for one afternoon. That's not unfair." I didn't argue. At my age, I've learned that receiving is also a way to love. One afternoon, Nora called, her voice light like she'd been waiting for this. A moment, a long time. Congratulations, Mrs. Janice. The divorce is finalized. Riley can take only her personal items and clothes. No assets, no payout. I sat down, my hands trembling slightly. Not from joy, but because that awful chapter had finally, truly closed. Thank you, Nora. Not just for the case, but for showing me women can be strong at any age. Nora laughed. You've been doing that yourself for a long time. I only delivered the judgment. That evening, I cooked the first dinner in nearly 2 years with Caleb back at the table. Honey roasted chicken and mashed potatoes, just the way he likes it. I sent my son a short message. If you're not busy, come home for dinner tonight. No need to say anything, just eat. Around 7 p.m., the doorbell rang. Caleb stood outside with a bouquet of white chrysanthemums. For you, he said, his voice a little tight, because you did what I couldn't. You kept the house, and you kept your heart. I took the flowers and set them in a vase in the center of the table. We sat down to a simple meal that felt strangely warm. No one mentioned Riley. No one mentioned the hard days. There was only the soft clink of silverware, the wind at the window, and a feeling I thought I'd lost forever: safety. When we finished, Caleb helped me wash the dishes. I stood beside him, drying each plate, and said slowly, "You know, I didn't think we'd ever have this day." Caleb looked up, his eyes gentler. Me neither. But sometimes miracles don't come from prayers, they come from lessons so painful they force you to change. I smiled and nodded, and from having the courage to walk back into the house that once hurt you. That night, after Caleb left, I stepped onto the porch and looked at the rose garden in the moonlight. The wind carried the smell of earth, flowers, and things that had come back to life. I whispered to Theo, "Do you see? I kept my promise. Our home is still a place of love, not a battlefield." At 72, I understand this. Forgiveness doesn't erase the past, it only opens a path for the future to begin. And tonight, when the door of Middleton House closed behind me, for the first time in a very long while, I knew I'd truly come home, not just in body, but in heart. A year after the night Caleb came back for dinner, the rose garden bloomed at its fullest again. The deep purple blooms colored the path, and their fragrance made me think of Theo, the man who believed all his life that every storm passes if we stand firm. That morning, Caleb called. His voice held a little excitement, but it was warmer and steadier than ever. "Mom, I have something to tell you." "Another coming home conversation?" He gave a small laugh. "No, Mom. It's about building a home in my own way." And then he said he'd proposed to Eva. I was quiet for a few seconds. In Caleb's voice, I heard a calm I hadn't heard in years. No theatrics, no empty promises, just the steadiness of a man who had fallen and learned how to stand up the right way. That afternoon, Eva came by. She hugged me lightly and spoke softly. "I know I don't need permission, but I want to listen to you first. If you're not truly comfortable, Caleb and I will wait." I looked at her and saw something in her eyes. Riley never had respect. I smiled and nodded. "I only need to know my son is loved with freedom, not with conditions." She squeezed my hand and smiled brightly. Then I believe this is the right beginning. The wedding was small, in the rose garden behind Middleton House. Just a few relatives, a few friends, and Martin, my brother, stood as officiant. Caleb wore a gray suit. Eva wore a simple white dress, no diamonds, no champagne, just soft music and the scent of orchids drifting in the breeze. When Martin raised his glass, he spoke slowly, his voice as steady as ever. "To those who dare to say no at the right time and dare to begin again, even late." We clinked glasses, and sunlight flashed through crystal, bright as a blessing. I sat quietly watching my son and his bride dance. The old pain seemed to dissolve into the air, not gone, but no longer throbbing. It had become soil where something new could grow. When the reception ended, Caleb came to me and kissed my forehead. "Mom, I promise, I will never touch Middleton House." I smiled and exhaled, as if setting down a weight I'd carried far too long. "You don't need to promise, just remember this house doesn't need a guard. It needs someone who knows how to cherish it." A few weeks later, I met Nora again. She looked at me and recognized I was no longer the trembling woman who'd signed papers a year ago. "You seem lighter." "Because I've learned how to trust again," I said, then opened my bag and handed her a folder. "I want to update my personal will." Nora looked it over and smiled. "The Theodore and Janice Middleton Art Scholarship Fund. Sounds beautiful." I nodded. "Instead of leaving money for someone to hold, I want to leave chances for others to begin. Maybe somewhere there's a girl painting in a small room who still believes in the good." Nora set a hand on my shoulder. "You didn't just keep the house, you kept its spirit," I answered, my voice low. "Keeping myself, that's the real victory, Nora." That night I opened the old leather journal, the one where I'd once recorded every piece of evidence, every hurt. On the last page I wrote, "Boundaries aren't walls. Boundaries are love that knows how to protect itself. When we say enough, it doesn't mean we don't love. It means we love enough not to turn ourselves into victims anymore." I closed the journal and set it in the drawer beside Theo's wedding band. Outside, the night wind stirred the curtains. Late one evening, I stepped onto the porch with a hot cup of tea and watched the small lights flicker across the roses. The wind carried their sweetness, and in the rustle of leaves, I heard Theo's voice, deep, warm, far and near at once. "I always knew you'd do it, Janice." I looked up at the sky and smiled. "I kept the house, Theo, but more important, I kept myself." I closed my eyes and let the breeze move through my silver hair, letting my heart drift like the last leaf of the season, not forgetting, but feeling peace in memories carefully put back in place. If someone asked me what peace is, I'd say, it's when you can walk through the room that once made you shake and not feel afraid. It's when you can remember the person who hurt you and no longer feel hatred. It's when you know the past no longer orders the present. I once thought that to go on, I had to forget, but now I know peace isn't forgetting, it's remembering without pain. I added one last line to my journal. If anyone is being dismissed, being pushed out of their own home, remember, keep records, install evidence, find trustworthy allies, and never back down, even when they say you're too old to fight. Before bed, I opened the window. The moon sank, laying a soft gold light over the house. Middleton House was no longer a battleground, but a home again, the place where a woman learned that true love always walks hand in hand with boundaries. I smiled and whispered, "Good night, Theo. Thank you for leaving me a house where I could learn to become the owner of myself." Then I returned to the table and lit a small candle, letting its warm shimmer touch our old photograph, the smiles still full, as if there had never been any parting. If this story made you pause to remember yourself for a boundary, a hurt, or a time you had to be strong, tell me where you're listening from. I don't need numbers. I just want to know that somewhere out there, someone is awake, listening, and finding faith again the way I once did. Even one comment, one like, or one small subscription can be the hand you extend to those who feel lost, letting them know they're not alone. Thank you for staying until the end, for sharing your time to walk through this story with me. I'll see you in the next one, where we'll find another piece of peace amid all the things we thought we'd lost.